As mentioned earlier, today was my group's turn to see the Temple of Philae and tour the sites around the city of Aswan. Around 9 a.m., the bus picked us up and drove us out to an area near the Aswan High Dam. Arriving at a departure area, we put on flotation vests for a trip over the waters of Lake Nassar. Every boat there was individually owned, and there were a huge number of them all jostling to get near the quay to pick up the passengers. It was nearly total chaos, but somehow everybody got there and there was no violence. The day hadn't really started yet, and we weren't into the high tourist season, so there were a lot more boats tied up offshore. What a mess it must be when all the boats are in operation. We all finally got aboard our several boats and headed out to the Temple's Island. And there it was, beautifully looming over the trapped waters of the Nile. Here is a good picture of the Roman quay that used to be the main entrance to the temple complex in ancient times. And here's Trajan's kiosk seen from the Nile. The boats landed us on the dock for a short hike to the temple complex. The landing is at the opposite end of the island, where the Roman quay was the original entrance to the temple complex. Looking west from near the landing, here's the remains of Nectanebo's kiosk. Nectanebo II was the last native Egyptian pharaoh before the Persians and then the Greeks ruled Egypt. To the left, where you see the two people standing in the foreground, that is the modern outdoor theater used to give lectures, and especially for the nighttime light show. The two tall structures are the first pylon of the temple. This and the next two pictures are the same thing from different perspectives. We are on the east side of the main temple right now. Before I go on, I should mention that this island contained small and large temples to many gods, and even to the worship of certain Roman emperors. The main temple shown here was dedicated to the Lady Isis, probably the most beloved of all the goddesses, and whose worship extended all over the Roman world and lasted late into Christian times. Leading up to the first pylon is a beautiful colonnade, parts of which were never finished. Another picture of the first pylon. Directly in front of the pylon on the right, you can see the ruins of the gate of Ptolemy II, who started the building of this temple complex. This and the next two pictures is a pan from left to right of the scene inside the courtyard between the first and second pylons, showing the front of the second pylon. This is a close-up of the pharaoh on the west side of the second pylon. And on the east side, here is the Lady Isis and her boy Horus. He was a handsome lad of a god, but he had a face only his mother could love. I guess that is why Isis was so popular. She was always so good and kind, just the perfect mother. As a matter of fact, Even the early Christians associated the loving character of Mary with her in order to entice converts to abandon paganism. In many temples, I saw examples where all the gods' faces were chiseled out by early Christians, but hers were mostly undamaged. You know, that reminds me of something. We had a sourpuss old guy, very unhappy man, in our group, who was always complaining about environmentalists, and he used the expression chiseler all the time. I hadn't heard that expression since my dad used it, but this guy was always referring to people as chiselers. Well, when I saw what the early Christians had done to some of these statues and drawings and reliefs of their gods and their pharaohs, I had a whole new meaning to the word chiseler. As with all temples, the first room was always a hypostyle hall filled with huge columns. This was not nearly as huge a temple as many others I've shown you, so the columns were much smaller. I might add here that the temple used to have beautiful colors still adhering to the columns and walls, but the soaking in the Nile when the high dam was built completely erased them. In early Christian times, the eastern part of the hypostyle hall was made into a Coptic church with an altar stone and tabernacle shown here. This doesn't show it very well, but the builders made a mistake and the rooms of the inner temple don't quite line up. Inside the holiest part of the temple, I snuck a picture of one of the Greek pharaohs giving offerings to the Lady Isis. Yes, the Ptolemies were Greeks and spoke Greek, but for ceremonial purposes they were as Egyptians could be. This and the next two pictures are simply pictures of the skylight and tops of the Greco-Roman Egyptian columns in the center of the hypostyle hall. Outside again, we were on the northeast side of the main temple, with the back side of the first pylon in the distance. This and the following three pictures are the beautiful kiosk of the Roman Emperor Trajan. There's a lot more beautiful ruins here on the island, but these are what struck me as most interesting. Once again, here is a picture of the temple looking east from out in the waters of Lake Nassau. Here's pretty much the same picture that was taken in 1850 when the temple complex was still in its original site within the first cataract of the Nile. By the way, Philae is a Greek corruption of the Egyptian word Pelank, which means the end, because this temple was the southernmost limit of Egypt at that time. And here is what that site looks like today. The pilings you see out in the water are the remains of a huge cofferdam that was built around the temple complex so it could be disassembled stone by stone and moved to the present site. The temple complex was rescued from the lake by a joint operation between the government of Egypt and the United Nations organization UNESCO. And here's what the Aswan High Dam looks like from the backside from the Philae temples. After leaving the temples, and returning to shore, we began our tour of the Aswan High Dam, a dam built amid a lot of controversy in 1960. The story of the building of this dam is a classic of Cold War rivalry. Evidently, the U.S. was originally going to build the dam, but the president of Egypt, Abdul Gamal Nasser, did the unthinkable. He got a better deal and started buying military equipment and supplies, much of which you can still see today equipping the Egyptian army, from the Soviet Union. Yes, folks, he bought them from the evil empire itself. This did not go down well with the military-industrial complex in the United States, that same bunch that has run the U.S. government since the end of World War II. So we pulled out of the deal with Nasser. Well, the Reds were good at building big dams too, so they stepped in and created this impressive engineering marvel called the Aswan High Dam. Everyone in my group was an American, so the guides whisked us quickly by this huge and impressive structure built in the center of the dam. This is the monument to Soviet-Egyptian friendship and contains beautiful sculpture honoring the achievements of those who built the dam. I sure wanted to stop and tour the memorial, but the guides were afraid some of the more closed-minded right-wingers would be offended. And besides, the Egyptian government is the recipient of billions of dollars of American aid, second only after Israel. And God knows they don't want to offend the touchy Bush administration at this point. Speaking of Soviet era, here's an army truck that probably came with the dam. It was full of army guys and had broken down. From the look of the liquid underneath it, I guess it had blown a cooling hose or something. Anyway, the battery was dead, and believe it or not, the guy in front was cranking it with a hand crank. I used to have an MG with a hand crank, and I tell you, they can certainly be lifesavers when you really need them. And here's a view from the top of the dam looking back toward the memorial. And looking the other way, showing part of the electrical generation system. Did I mention that all of Egypt is lit up like Christmas at night? Looking out on the lakeside of the dam, it looks like a vast inland sea out there. To the west is a beautiful temple that, like Philae, was rescued from the rising waters of Lake Nasser. This is the Temple of Kalabasa, built by the Emperor Augustus about the time of Jesus. It is dedicated to the god Marul, a local Nubian fertility god. The thing was built for political purposes by the Romans to secure the goodwill of the Nubian rulers and keep them from invading Aswan and southern Egypt. I guess it worked. After the tour of the High Dam, we returned to Aswan for a, quote, tour, unquote, of a papyrus institute. There was some beautiful stuff in there, but it was really expensive by Egyptian standards. The sales pressure was really high, and because I wanted to see the stuff, I had a whole team of salesmen following me at all times, like I was some kind of a Maharaja or something. Little did they know that my interest was as a visitor to an art museum, to look and appreciate but not to buy. Earlier, and just for a few dollars, I had bought some inferior but genuine paintings on papyrus that I was very, very pleased with. Anyway, here's the guy showing how the papyrus stems are soaked, then expertly split, and then pressed together in a gridwork to make a form of paper. All over southern Egypt, you see thousands of these Brome-style carriages pulled by a single pony. Some of the horses are poor-looking things, so my friend the Nederlander, the guy that was originally from Holland, picked out a carriage that seemed to have the best cared-for horse, and we hired the guy to take us on an hour's tour of Aswan. We agreed to a standard price that didn't amount to more than a few dollars apiece. These carriage rides are very popular with the Europeans. And it was kind of fun clipping along at this relaxed pace. Up ahead, we spotted a beautiful mosque on top of a hill. Little did I know we were going to be taken there, whether we wanted to or not. Actually, I wanted to see it. As I said, I wanted to see it, but my Dutchman buddy smelled a rat. When we got there, the building was completely deserted, but there were two rascals waiting for us. I doubt they were in any way connected with the mosque, but they bid us come in and look around for a small fee. Well, it only amounted to a couple of bucks, so I paid them, took off my shoes, and walked in. I'm glad I did, because it was completely empty of people and beautiful inside. And here's where the ladies worship. And here's the pulpit where the preacher man tells everybody how they're gonna be saved. When we went to leave, I kind of got the idea that those guys wanted some more money. But we played dumb, like, "Mi no comprende, señor," and we got out of there. We didn't get very far when our hour had run out, just like the driver had figured. Little did he know that my buddy and I were just dying to do some walking through town anyway, and this was the perfect opportunity. We were only about 2 miles from the boat anyway, and it was a wonderful time to walk. Anyway, the driver certainly seemed disappointed that we weren't going to be taking another hour's drive with him, but when we finally did leave, a funny thing happened. The driver cheated the Dutchman by shortchanging him a few dollars, and then drove off. When my Dutchman friend counted his money, he was hopping mad and yelled and screamed after the guy, but geez, it was only a couple of dollars. One nice thing about walking through the native parts of town is you don't have people pestering you to look and buy their stuff. However, that was soon to change as we approached the tourist part of town. Here the shop owners would call out to you in English and try their damnedest to get you to look at their stuff. I would just put on a highly amused grin and simply shake my head and walk on. As I would walk by their stalls, they would try extra hard to attract my attention, and when I would pass without stopping, they would use the expression, "Oh my God!" Yes, "Oh my God!" I don't know where they got that expression from, but every time they would say it, I would just laugh my ass off and say back to them, "Allah Akbar," which is an equally common expression in Arabic, meaning God is great. Well, with this day, my adventure in Egypt was rapidly coming to a close, and there wasn't much left except to fly back to Cairo and then back home.